On a crisp New York morning, the Good Morning America studio buzzed with anticipation. Clint Eastwood, the 94-year-old Hollywood legend, was set to appear, a rare booking for a man who'd rather let his films do the talking. The crew adjusted lights, the audience settled in, and George Stephanopoulos, the seasoned host, flipped through his notes, confident in the routine promotional chat ahead. Eastwood was there to discuss his latest film, a gritty drama that had critics buzzing. At his age, he was still a force, 6 decades in the industry, an icon of cool, from spaghetti westerns to Oscar-winning epics. The network execs were over the moon. Eastwood's presence guaranteed ratings. He walked onto the set with that unmistakable stride, slow, deliberate, like a gunslinger stepping into a dusty town. His steely blue eyes scanned the room, taking in the cameras, the crew, the audience. He settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket with the same precision he brought to every role. "Good morning, Clint," Stephanopoulos began, flashing his polished TV smile. "Thanks for joining us today." "Morning," Eastwood replied, his voice a gravelly drawl, his expression calm but watchful, like a man who'd seen every trick in the book. The interview started smoothly. Stephanopoulos lobbed softballs about the new film, and Eastwood answered with measured enthusiasm, his passion for storytelling clear. He spoke of the young cast, the script's raw honesty, the challenges of directing at his age. The audience leaned in, charmed by his understated charisma. A montage of his greatest hits, Dirty Harry, Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, played on the screen, a reminder of his towering legacy. Everything was going according to plan. But then, the air shifted. Stephanopoulos leaned forward, his smile tightening. "Clint, you've been in this business a long time. Hollywood's changed, more socially conscious, more focused on representation and diversity. How do you feel about those shifts?" Eastwood's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. This wasn't in the script. The audience sensed the pivot, a ripple of unease passing through the studio. "Well, George," he said slowly, his voice steady, "good stories are good stories. Doesn't matter who's telling them or who's in them. I've always hired the best person for the job." Stephanopoulos didn't let it go. "But surely you recognize the industry needed to change? There were systemic issues, barriers to representation." The temperature in the room dropped. Eastwood's jaw tightened, a telltale sign to anyone who'd seen his films that trouble was brewing. "Good filmmaking," he said, his voice taking on a familiar edge, "is about honest stories, authentic characters. Politics and agendas, they muddy that up." The host pressed harder, sensing a crack. "Isn't it political to ignore those issues? To act like representation doesn't matter?" Eastwood leaned back slightly, his gaze unyielding. "I'm not ignoring anything," he said, calm but firm. "When you make movies to check boxes instead of telling stories, you're making propaganda, not entertainment." The audience shifted in their seats, the morning show's breezy vibe evaporating. Camera operators exchanged glances, unsure whether to zoom in or cut away. In the control room, producers whispered frantically, torn between stopping the train wreck and letting it play out for the viral moment it was becoming. "That's an interesting perspective," Stephanopoulos said, his tone implying it was anything but. "Some might say that's the privilege of someone who's never had to worry about representation." Eastwood's eyes flashed, a spark of the old gunslinger igniting. "Privilege," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I grew up in the Depression, son. Dug swimming pools, worked in a steel mill before I ever stepped on a set. Everything I got, I earned through sweat and grit, not because of who I was." Stephanopoulos, undeterred, doubled down. "But the industry was different then. Opportunities weren't equal for everyone." "The industry was tough on everyone," Eastwood shot back. "I spent years getting rejected, playing bit parts for pennies. Nobody handed me anything because I was white or male. I kept going when others quit." The tension was electric now, the studio silent except for the hum of equipment. The producers were sweating, but the cameras kept rolling. This wasn't morning TV anymore, it was a showdown. Stephanopoulos, perhaps sensing a career-defining moment, leaned in further. "Clint, Surely you can acknowledge your generation of filmmakers had advantages: an old boy network, exclusionary practices. Eastwood's expression hardened, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. My generation? The one that fought in World War II? Built this country? That generation? He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I've never kept anyone out of anything. I hired based on one thing: can you do the job? Stephanopoulos, his composure slipping, went for the jugular. How many of your films had diverse casts? How many women directors did you champion? Eastwood's hands gripped the chair arms, his knuckles widening. The record, he said, his voice rising. I made movies about real people: soldiers, cops, cowboys, boxers, facing real challenges. I didn't cast based on some checklist from people who've never set foot on a set. So you admit diversity wasn't a priority? Stephanopoulos said, a hint of triumph in his voice. I admit storytelling was my priority, Eastwood replied, his tone sharp. Always has been. I showed America to itself, warts and all. But from a specific perspective, Stephanopoulos countered. White, male, conservative America. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Eastwood's legendary composure cracked. Conservative America, he said, his voice booming with the intensity of 1,000 movie showdowns. You think Unforgiven was conservative? $1 Million Baby? You haven't been paying attention, son. Those are exceptions, Stephanopoulos dismissed. Your work promotes a specific worldview. Eastwood leaned forward, his eyes blazing. My worldview? People should take responsibility, work hard, treat others with respect. If that's controversial, maybe you're the one with the problem. The host, now visibly flustered, tried another angle. Don't your films perpetuate stereotypes about masculinity? Violence as a solution? Eastwood stood abruptly, the chair scraping like a gunshot. The studio froze. Stereotypes, he said, towering over Stephanopoulos. How about the stereotype that anyone who disagrees with you is a racist or sexist? You invited me here to talk about my movie, then ambushed me to score points for your agenda. I'm asking legitimate questions, Stephanopoulos stammered, shrinking under Eastwood's presence. No, you're not, Eastwood snapped. You're playing gotcha on live TV. You thought you could use me to sharpen your axe. I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, George. I've faced real critics, not desk jockeys with a script. The audience was riveted, some nodding, others wide-eyed. The crew stood motionless, caught in the gravity of the moment. Stephanopoulos, his face flushed, tried to recover. Maybe you're not used to being challenged on your legacy. Eastwood's laugh was sharp, bitter. Challenged? Son, I made movies about a racist learning to change, a woman boxer defying the odds, the cost of violence, the weight of redemption. You call that simplistic? You're so busy looking for problems, you missed the point of my work. Stephanopoulos, desperate, kept pushing. Your films celebrate a masculine heroism many find problematic today. Problematic, Eastwood repeated, shaking his head. Everything's problematic to you, isn't it? Standing up for what's right, protecting who you love, that's problematic? I've told stories about every kind of person, but that doesn't count because I didn't make a speech about it. The host, now on the ropes, tried one last jab. Your influence shaped Hollywood in ways that weren't always positive. Eastwood's composure shattered completely. My influence, he roared, his voice filling the studio. I created a genre. I showed movies could be popular and meaningful. I employed thousands, actors, writers, crew, based on talent, not quotas. I built careers, told stories people still watch decades later. What have you built, George? Stephanopoulos squirmed, but his ego wouldn't yield. That focus on profit over principles, that's what held Hollywood back. Profit? Eastwood said, incredulous. Without profit, there are no movies, no jobs, no stories. You can have all the principles you want, but if nobody watches, you're just shouting into the void. The confrontation was at its peak, Eastwood looming over the desk, Stephanopoulos small and defensive. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation," the host said weakly. "Honest?" Eastwood shot back. "This is an ambush. You brought me here to tear down my life's work, to paint me as the villain in your little morality play. I came to talk movies, not politics. I'm done." With that, he reached down, unhooked his microphone with the precision of a man who dismantled countless props, and dropped it on the chair with a thud that echoed like a gavel. "Wait," Stephanopoulos pleaded, panic in his voice. "This is live TV. Watch me," Eastwood said, turning to the cameras. "Folks, I'm sorry you had to see this. I came to talk storytelling, the craft I love. Instead, I got lectured by someone who thinks 50 years of work means nothing if it doesn't fit his politics." Stephanopoulos tried to interrupt, but Eastwood's glare silenced him. "I've spent my life entertaining people, telling stories that matter. If that's not enough for some, that's their problem." He turned and walked off, his footsteps steady, fading into the stunned silence of the studio. Stephanopoulos sat alone, his face red, his polished persona in tatters. The cameras lingered, capturing his struggle to find words, but nothing could undo the moment. The audience sat frozen, some in awe, others in shock. The crew exchanged looks, knowing they'd just witnessed history. Clint Eastwood, the last gunslinger, had walked away victorious, leaving behind a host humbled and a morning show segment that would be talked about for years.